The best time ever to be a woman in theory because we can all talk together. Okay, so I would like to introduce, it's my great, great honor to introduce Maria Klawe. She is a computer scientist and the fifth president and first female president of Harvey Med College. She's been in this position since 2006. And before that, she was the dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences here at Princeton. And I don't know if you've all observed the pictures in the hall where we have our lunches and coffee breaks and so on. So the room is covered with the pictures of the deans of this department. And there's sort of a unifying idea between most of them, but then there's Maria's picture, which I love, and also she drew herself. But I think
No, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't? Somebody told me that you did.
No, it was done by Maya Schweitzer, who was an undergrad here in earth sciences while I was dean, and then she went to do her PhD at Caltech.
I see.
And while she was there, so you get to pick who does the portrait.
I see.
So I thought Maya should do it.
Okay. But of course it has a completely different spirit than everything else. And I think that in some ways that really explains who Maria is. She has her opinions about these things and she goes and she pursues them. And I really think to the benefit of us all that she has taken these approaches. I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. I want to go through a little bit more details. So she got her BSc and PhD in mathematics from University of Alberta. And then she started another PhD in Toronto, but was offered a faculty position and spent some time there. Then she was 8 years at my company, at IBM Research. Well, not my company, but where I work. And she was the manager of the discrete math group and the manager of the mathematics and related computer science department. Then she moved to University of British Columbia, and she was there for 15 years. And she was head of the department there, and vice president of student and academic services from 95 to 98. And then, this is at Princeton, of course, and then the dean from 90.
No,
this is still UBC, yes. And then dean there from. I would ask you to turn it off. Okay.
No, it's Jennifer Chase.
You want to put her on Skype and we can all hear the conversation?
We can all talk to her.
Okay. And in 2009, she joined the board of Microsoft, and she's a trustee for the Mathematical Science Research Institute in Berkeley, and a member of both the Stanford Engineering and Advisory Council and the Advisory Council for the Computer Science Teachers Association. Then, of course, she has many, many awards and accolades. She's the fellow of the ACM. She's a founding fellow of the Canadian Information Processing Society, member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and she has awards that include the Vancouver YWCA Women of Distinction Award in Science and Technology, Wired Women Pioneer, Canadian New Media Educator of the Year, and the truth is it continues on and on. I don't want to. It really is an impressive list. And her research, she has contributions in many areas: mathematics, computer science, functional analysis, discrete math, and here the list continues also. And I want to say something personal, that when I came to the field, Maria was already around and was already involved in all these issues of women. And I remember seeing her. It was in a Grace Hopper conference, and I felt, I want to do things like she does it in some way, that she does a huge, huge service to this community, and really I admired it, and I listened at that workshop. They were it was a discussion of how to teach women math, little girls, sorry, not women, how to teach girls math in elementary and high school. And I really was inspired. So I just want to say thank you personally, and thank you for agreeing to come and give the talk, and help me welcome Maria.
Thanks, And I have to say that when I was invited to come and give a talk at my first Vital, my first response was, Cal, I'm not really doing a lot of research and theory anymore, so if you want a theory talk, that's probably not going to work, but if you want me just to talk about women in theory or women in computer science, I'd be happy to do that. And she wrote back immediately and said, just come and be inspirational. So I want to talk about, I mean, what I really want to give you a snapshot of is where we are today in terms of women in computer science, women in theory, and where we've come from and where we're going. And when I say best time ever to be a woman in theory, I'm really sort of dividing that into best time ever to be a woman in computer science and best time ever to be a person working in theoretical computer science. So it's not really like it's two separate things. I'm going to talk a little bit more about getting more women into computer science. Some of you probably saw some of the articles that there have been about what Harvey, my college, has done in terms of increasing the number of women majoring in computer science. And we're the highest. I guess we're not the highest because there's places like Bryn Mawr and Smith that are women's colleges that also offer computer science degrees. But we're the highest among all co-ed institutions in the United States. We've been between 40%, slightly more than 40% for 3 years now, and we were down at 10 to 12% like most other places in 2006. And I just want to make it really clear, I had nothing to do with this. I happened to arrive in 2006, and yes, I have worked on this. I worked on it at UBC for at least a decade. I co-founded the Computing Research Association's Committee on the Status of Women, CRAW, which is one of the reasons the numbers are high for women in graduate school, because that group has worked on it for now 22 years. But in this particular case at MUD, I can take no credit, but I'll tell you about how that happened. I'm going to give you my own personal advice for success, and I'm also going to give you Sheryl Sandberg's advice for success. How many of you were at the Hopper conference in Portland? How many did you get to hear Sheryl Sandberg's talk? Were you inspired?
Yeah, she's a fantastic speaker. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, I'll just take a moment. How many of you read Anne-Marie Slaughter's article in Monthly? So one of the things, so I was a dean here at the same time as Anne-Marie Slaughter. She's somebody I admire greatly. I have a tremendous amount of respect for her. But the only thing, and I really think there's a lot of merit in what she wrote in The Atlantic, but what I really was not happy about was that she put herself in opposition to the recommendations that Sheryl Sandberg makes, and in particular into Sheryl's encouraging people to aim high. And I actually talked to Sheryl the day that the New York Times article came out, and she was definitely feeling like I'm one of those people who spends a very big part of my life trying to promote a culture in science and engineering that supports women and also people of color and people who are artists and poets and just anyone who's not like the norm. And I have to say Sheryl is another person like that, and who has put a huge amount of her personal credibility on the line to be outspoken about this. And she, when the New York Times article came out and Anne-Marie's article came out, she really felt sort of punched in the gut. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about Sheryl because I think the way she's interpreted it in the Atlantic article is completely incorrect. And I'm going to close by talking about this issue about, can we have it all? Can we really combine a career with having children? And I think the reality is that's the wrong question. It's really about nobody gets to have it all. And Joan Gerges this morning made that pretty clear. Everybody throughout their life will be making, whether you're male or female, if you have a family, even just a partner in your life, if you have parents, if you have children, you're going to be constantly weighing different things and making different choices. And so it's not, the thing I want to talk about it is the world has changed greatly since the time when my mother was pursuing her career and had children. And it has changed as well since the time when I was your age and wanted to pursue a career and have children. And I think it is progressing in the right direction. It's still got a ways to go, and I'll talk about that, but I do think that the derivative is definitely positive, and it's a reasonably positive slope. So now I should put a caveat around this. I'm sometimes accused of being the most optimistic person on the face of the earth. I think that's generally a plus. But, you know, you can, when we have our combining work-life issues panel tomorrow, you'll see I'm at one end of the spectrum. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I was really lucky to marry a saint. Initially, when we started going out together, his name is Nick Pippinger, well-known theoretical computer scientist. If you know about Nick's class, NC, that's the Nick. Was named not by Nick, by Steve Cook. But in any case, when I started going out with him, my parents started referring him to as St. Nicholas. But the reason was, you know, like the way this thing, and the rest of my family said as well, you'd have to be a saint to live with Maria. Okay, so one of the things that's happening, I would say right now, is there's a lot more recognition, both by industry and by academia, that having a more diverse workforce, having more diverse faculty, having more diverse software engineers, having more diverse executives, not so much in industry, but certainly in terms of, at the college recruiting and at the PhD recruiting level, companies really want to hire more women. And I think it's not just that they want to hire more women, they want to have more people who have broader interests and bring broader perspectives. And certainly, maybe not in every university, but in many universities, there's a tremendous interest in increasing the number of female faculty, especially in areas like computer science. And it wasn't always that way. I mean, it really is true that, about the time that I was getting my PhD, being female was not such a plus in looking for a faculty position or in looking for an industry position. Now, in industry, it's also driven by the fact that there just are not enough talented people who understand computer science to hire. And so they're aware of the fact that if most young women are not interested in studying computer science, that is taking a large part of the population out of the equation. And so they would really like to do something about it. And in academia, I think it's just the recognition that departments with women in them, they're just better. I mean, one of the things I really noticed while I've been at MUD, the number of female faculty has gone from roughly a third to about 45%, and the number of female students has gone from about 30% to about 45%. And it just feels different. It feels warmer, more vibrant, more creative, more social, more all kinds of things. And I'll tell you that the male faculty and the male students are just as happy about it as the female students. And I'll also say that, MUD happens to be situated across the street from a women's college. I mean, and across a fence from a college that's more than 50% women. So it wasn't that there weren't any women in the immediate neighborhood, but it is better. So let me talk about the progress on combining career and personal life. Oh, God, I misspelled. My apologies. So one of the things that Joan Gerges talked to you about this morning is one of her roles is to try and help the other part of the partnership find a position. And one of the things we know about women in areas of science and engineering is, on balance, they tend to be partnered with somebody else who has an ambitious career. And this was part of the discussion that Tal and I were having, and they're often partnered with somebody who is an academic. And so the universities and colleges that have programs in place to actually help two people get positions in the same geographic area can, in general, recruit better people than, on average, than those that don't. So those of you who, how many of you would like to think you might like to become a professor eventually? Okay, that's a reasonable chunk. One of the things when you're thinking about this, and I won't go into a lot of advice right now, but I do a lot of mentoring of people who are in, a couple who are both looking for academic positions, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. Or you guys notice that I paint, and one of the things I do while I paint when I'm at home is I actually do phone calls with people I mentor on the weekends. And so if you want to have a conversation, if you happen to be trying to figure this out and you would like a reasonably trustworthy, reliable person to talk to about it, I'm happy to help. You just send me an email. It's my last name, Klawe, at hmc.edu, and we'll set up a time on a weekend while I'm painting. They're also becoming, as you heard from Joan this morning, I mean, places are getting better about facilitating becoming a mother and being able to combine your career with having children. So let's see. Tal, how many children do you have?
2.
Valerie, how many children do you have? Renee, how many children do you have?
2.
Maria, how many children do you have? 2. Any of our other faculty here have children? So in Princeton,
Lisa.
yeah, Lisa, how many children do you have? 2. Okay, well, the vast majority of female computer scientists I know have 2. I do know people.
Because we only know how to count in binary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do know some people who don't have children, and I do know people who have more than 2 children, but it's pretty common in our field to actually do this. There's a significant variance in practice among institutions. So if you're, and even, I mean, one of the things is, for example, one of the great things about being a theoretical computer science is, number one, most of what you're going to be doing is going on in here, right? Number two, you can do a lot of what you do on a beach, in a library, on a plane, on a train. Even if you're collaborating, theoretical computer science tends to be a very collaborative field. But a lot of those collaborations go on partly in real time together and partly, I know collaborations, I've been in collaborations where we had people at different time zones around the world. So somebody would be working on, the paper. I guess if I stop talking, it stops. Would be working on the paper in London, and somebody would be working on the paper in Vancouver, and somebody would be working on the paper in Taiwan or whatever. And I mean, collaboration really does work. So we are very fortunate that we're in a field where we can do our research in lots of different places, and we can even collaborate in lots of different modes. As Joan mentioned, if you're a lab scientist, really for many people in chemistry and biology, they're slaves while they're PhD students. I mean, they literally are in the lab on 80, 90 hours a week. And the same continues when they're doing their postdocs, and it's not really until they become more senior faculty that they're not expected to spend those kinds of hours there. So I'm hoping that over time institutions will converge towards having, pretty uniform supportive practices. But today there is a wide variance, and so when you're looking at job possibilities, it's worth taking that into account. And but it's still true that lots more progress is needed, especially in areas like, for instance, in law, where you're really judged on your billable hours, and you're expected, particularly in early positions in law firms, to put in incredible hours. I'm happy to say that for the most part, there's not a lot of computer scientists I know that get paid on billable hours, and that's a really good thing. And if you ever see that coming, don't let it happen. So it's come a long way over the last 25 years. And I'll just tell you a little bit. So I was the second child of my family. My mother was an economics professor before she got pregnant the first time. with my older sister. I was born and in those days, so my older sister was born in 1948. I was born in 1951. And in those days, the idea of continuing to work just was not really an option. And so she intended to have 2 children. She stayed home with both of us. And then birth control back in those days was not, there was no pill. There wasn't really reliable birth control. She was extremely fertile. And so she got pregnant twice more by mistake. And so she was actually away from being a faculty member in economics for 12 years. She went back when my youngest sister was 3. And in that particular period of time, the entire field had switched dramatically and had become much, much more mathematical than, and the field that she was in labor economics. And by then, the whole style of research had completely changed. She was an extraordinary teacher, so she was actually able to have a position and be tenured, be promoted to associate professor, just because she was an incredible teacher, but she never, ever did research again. So you can imagine when I'm growing up, I'm going, whatever I do, I'm not going to stop doing research. When I have children, I'm going to keep on doing research because, you know, I realized I ended up in between mathematics and computer science. Theoretical computer science is a very rapidly evolving field, and I really felt like if I was gone for 3 years, the whole field would have moved. And so I was lucky that I was working for IBM Research when I had my first child. I had a supportive manager and manager's manager. I was back at work 5 weeks after my first child was born, and I think 6 weeks after my second child was born. But I'll tell you that, you know, I took time to go breastfeed my children. That's how supportive the workplace was. I had a nanny, and the kids were, you know, basically across the street from where the lab was, and I would go every 3 hours and breastfeed my children. And you know, just the fact that I could do this was hugely important to me, that it was really possible to keep on doing my research while my children were really small. And I've already mentioned my husband is a saint. So one of the things that has really changed, I would say, even just over the last decade, is there's a lot more visibility for women. So I think probably all of you know what the Turing Award is. It is the highest prize you can win in computer science. We think of it sort of as the Nobel Prize. And we have had 2 female Turing Award winners. Fran Allen was the first one, and Barbara Liskov, I believe it was 2 years later after that, have won it within the last 5 years. Before that, in however many years, 50 years or something like that, no women had won it. And I'll just tell you that I went on the Turing Awards committee at a time, as one of the committee selection members at a time when no women had won it. And I said at the beginning to the then chair, who was Al Aho, Al, well, I'm on this committee, 2 women are going to win the Turing Award. Because I figured one wasn't enough, because if you just did one, then everyone would say that was just Fran. And I remember Al looked at me and said, well, you can't decide to do that. We should never select somebody because of their gender. And I said, Al, there's some really great candidates. And, you know, it's just a question of people really taking nominations seriously. And I'm really happy to say that, yes, indeed. So Fran Allen was selected, I think, my 3rd year on the committee, maybe my 2nd year on the committee. And the very next year, Barbara Liskov was nominated by MIT. She'd never been nominated before. And I think, frankly, her department didn't think about her until after they saw Fran. I mean, they didn't think about about nominating her until after they saw that Fran Allen won. And, you know, one of the reasons to get, sometimes you just have to break the pattern so that people start to think more broadly. One of the things that I mentioned, Sheryl Sandberg, one of the things that Sheryl has been doing, so there's an interesting thing that's happened about women in tech careers. I'm going to be 61 years old in 2 weeks. I have to say turning 60 is really great. because for some reason people take you more seriously when your hair gets to be this color. It's really good. And so virtually all the women of my generation, we took it as our responsibility to really try to open the doors for more women. Because, you know, even though there were more women undergraduates in computer science back in 1980 or 1979 or whatever than there are today, there definitely were not more women faculty. And so, you know, there was a lot of work that needed to be done to increase the number of women in PhD programs, the number of women who went into faculty positions. And we just sort of took it for granted that it was our responsibility to talk about maternity leaves, being, you know, methods of running search committees that were going to look at more diverse pools of candidates, all of these kinds of things. And the women who are now in their early 40s, for the most part, so they came along 20 years later, and it's sort of, by then, it was no longer a good career move to talk about being female. And so most of that generation of women who are now in their early 40s, they've just been one of the guys. And I think it was because everyone assumed that there wasn't going to be a problem anymore. They sort of figured, okay, the doors have been opened, women are going into these fields, we don't have to talk about it. And what has happened is that, in fact, if you look at women at the highest levels in technology companies, actually it plateaued about 15 years ago and there's been absolutely no progress. And so Sheryl Sandberg, who's the CEO of Facebook, and actually, you know, whose undergraduate degree was in economics and then did an MBA, so she will say herself, she's not a technical woman. And she thinks she would be a better COO at Facebook if she had studied computer science. I'm not entirely sure that's true. She's pretty talented. But she's been talking a lot about how important it is to get more women into technology, both for the opportunities that the women themselves will have, for the impact that it will have on companies, for the impact that it will have on workplaces when women are in the leadership roles. And then I'll just mention the Hopper Conference. The Hopper Conference.
Is it from the recording?
Or a cell phone meeting?
Maybe if I stand here.
Okay.
Can everybody check their cell phones?
It should be a cell phone that's near this.
Maria, maybe it's yours.
Is your cell phone in your pocket?
No, it's way over there in my backpack. I think it's.
Could we just turn the speakers off if they're not being used? Or are the speakers?
If we turn the speakers off, then it won't be they won't hear it well enough for the recording is the issue. So, Hopper, even just 10 years ago, only had 600 attendees. And it was, initially it was run every third year. It started in 1994. It had 453 attendees, of which 3 were men. And it was run every 3 years, then it went to every 2 years, and it's been annual since 2006 when it was held in San Diego. And it has grown from, I think it was about 1,200. San Diego was just like maybe 3 people under 3,000 in Portland, but it sold out, so it would have been more if there were more space. And it will be over 3,000 in Baltimore this year. Raise your hand if you have never been to a Hopper conference. Oh my goodness. Okay. Every single one of you, ask your department to sponsor you to go to Hopper. And if, I mean, by that I mean pay for your registration fee, pay for your travel. You should sleep in groups of 4 if you can find 4 women from your thing. Why should you do this? Because there is just, I mean, have you felt like it's sort of energizing having 50 female theoretical computer scientists all in the same room? Does that feel good? Does that feel really different from your day-to-day experience? Okay, imagine 3,000 females, all passionate, exuberant, excited. It is wonderful. I hope to see all of you there. I will be there. I have been at every hopper but one. I had to miss one because it was exactly the same time as a board meeting. So, okay, computational thinking. So I'm now switching to talking about why this is a totally fabulous time to be getting a graduate degree in theory. You know, it was an incredibly wonderful time in theory when I got into theoretical computer science, which was 1978, because it was just exploding. There were so many results, because there were so many new problems, and people were, I mean, there was just lots and lots of opportunity to really make a contribution. And so I sort of feel that between, say, 78 and probably early 2000s, gradually it became sort of more and more esoteric, and the problems that were there, I mean, there were growing areas, but there were lots of old problems that were just really, really hard. And then all of a sudden, I would say in the last decade, it's wide open again. Why is it wide open? I mean, it's partly because of the internet and all of the kinds of questions that we heard about today about, you know, there's so many algorithmic questions about online advertising. There's so many algorithmic questions about social networks. But there's algorithmic questions in biology, there's algorithmic questions in every area of science, because computation has become sort of the third approach to doing science. But there are algorithmic questions in music and in movies, and I mean, it's just theoretical computer science is becoming a doorway that you can sort of look at almost any discipline and make a contribution. And you know, sooner or later, that also will probably plateau, but you'll probably be old by then. You'll be like me. So it's a really great time for you to be going into these areas. It's a wonderful time to be able to take mathematics, which I assume every single one of you loves, since you wouldn't be at a Women in Theory conference otherwise, together with computation and all of the things about the internet. And it's just, you know, we've been through a recession. It was horrible. The job market in computer science, probably for the first time in 40 years, really sucked. People had to get postdocs. You know, most other disciplines, you always had to get postdocs for the last 40 years. It used to be in computer science you didn't. It's not a bad thing to get a postdoc. It's actually a great opportunity to learn more, to branch out into new areas. But I think it's, unless we have a double dip recession, which is possible, you guys should do fine. And then the other thing I'm really excited about is Jim Simons, who was Barbara Simons. For those of you who know Barbara Simons, was her first husband. He's a hedge fund billionaire, also a very talented mathematician, works in differential geometry, but also worth at least $10 billion. And he decided that he was going to fund our Theoretical Computer Science Research Institute. Several universities competed for it. Berkeley eventually won. And the first program, I believe, is starting in spring 2013, might be summer 2013. But this is going to be just an incredible opportunity. There's going to be tons of visitors there. And I think it's one of the reasons why the Berkeley proposal won is that it really proposed to be a very interdisciplinary research institute. So if you get a chance to do, there will be opportunities for graduate students and postdocs to visit the Simons Institute. And if you get that opportunity, you should definitely take it. Okay, now I'm going to talk about getting more women into computer science. So this data looks different from the data that Joan Gerges showed you. She showed you the NSF data. I'm showing you data from the Tolby survey. The Tolby survey is conducted by the Computing Research Association. It collects data from PhD granting computer science departments. So for instance, it doesn't include places like MUD. It's also typically 80 to 90% of the departments respond, so it's not 100%. But most computer scientists will tell you this is much more accurate data, because the problem about and the NSF data is it mixes in things like MIS, Management Information Systems programs, which are really quite different and tend to have a higher percentage of women. So as you can see, the percentage of bachelor's degrees going to women from PhD granting departments in 2000 was about 20%. By the time we got to 2006, between 2006 and...
1 second. Can you please fix it or turn the microphone off or something?
It's definitely weird. Do you think it might be that mic that it's...
Okay, that might be up too high.
What's that?
That might be turned up too high. Now when you talk, what happens?
Okay, let's try it again.
It may just have been that it was up too high.
Let's move on a little bit. So what happened was that after 2000, after the dot-com bust, the number of women actually majoring in computer science fell by a factor of 2. Whereas and it fell twice as fast as, the number of students overall fell, but the number of women fell much more dramatically than the number of men. And so for the last 5 years, the average has been, in terms of bachelor's degrees that have been given, the average has been between 11% and 14% in the US. And in Canada, it's harder to get the same kind of data, but my guess is that it's between 12 and 18%, something like that, over the same period of time. So, as I mentioned, at Harvey College, when I arrived, 10% of our CS majors were female. So typically there were between 25 and 30 CS majors graduating a year, and the number of females was 2, 3, or in a really great year, it was 4. And the year before I arrived, a young woman named Christine Alvarado, who had just finished her PhD at MIT, arrived at MUD. And she sort of looked at this and said, let's do something about it. And together with a handful of other faculty, they went and they read all of the papers in the field, and there are papers about how to change this, and they decided to work on it. And within 3 years, they were up to 40% female. So what did they do? Well, what the research shows is, why don't women choose to study computer science as undergraduates? 1, they think it's not interesting. 2, they think they won't be good at it. And 3, there's not a lot of sort of social encouragement from their peers. So how many of you as an undergraduate had somebody say, you don't look like a computer scientist to me? Yeah. You don't look that dorky. How do you get along with all those geeks? Et cetera, et cetera. So, what they did at Harvey College. So Harvey College has one advantage that some places also have, but not all places. And the advantage is that every single student, male or female, they have to take a computer science course in their first semester. They also have to take a physics course, a chemistry course, 2 math classes, a writing course, etc. But it's one of the courses they have to take. So they decided that they would look at the research about what makes computer science more interesting, more engaging to women, and they would change their course. So I will tell you exactly what they did in a moment. They also thought, this bit about encouragement, what if we took our first-year female students to the Grace Hopper Conference and they saw all of these passionate, exuberant, crazy women in technology? Wouldn't that increase their interest in their confidence and their confidence? And now, if you go to MUD, you're going to major in an area of science or engineering. And they thought, it doesn't really matter if you're going to be in physics or if you're going to be engineering. It's going to be good for you to see 3,000 technical women. Well, 1,200 when we first started. And then there's research that shows that if you can get women and minorities engaged as undergraduates in research, they're much more likely to persist. And so we got a 4-year grant for something called the Baker Foundation, and we were able to offer about 10 young women a research experience in computer science, called a societally relevant research experience in computer science. So, like maybe you were modeling the spread of disease, or maybe you're doing educational games, something like that. So the most important of these, and fortunately they did lots of research to study what seemed to have the most impact. The most important thing was to change the intro class. So Jenny, which class were you in?
I was in 65.
You were in 65.
Yes. That's the 42.
Oh, that's 42, okay. Before it became 42.
Yes.
Okay, it was called 65, all right. So the first thing they did was our introduction to computer science. It was a very typical one. It was large program in Java. And they changed it to computational approaches to problem solving using Python. Okay, so pretty much the same amount of coding, maybe more. Same concepts that they were learning. But the motivation is totally different. Because you are learning to program because you're solving a fun problem. You're not learning to program because somebody is telling you you're learning to program. And so they also streamed the class. So they divided the students into 3 groups. The students who had basically 0 prior experience. That's actually the majority of the students entering MUD, because there's not a lot of, the number of computer science courses available in high school has greatly diminished over the last 10 to 15 years. Then CS5 black, our colors are black and gold, so CS5 gold is for no prior experience. It's important which one they call gold and which one they call black. CS5 black is for people with a fair amount of prior experience. What's now called 42, because that's the obvious number between 5 and 60, because 60 is the next class, for those of you who've read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. To the universe. CS42 is for people who are essentially coming in with the equivalent of a year of computer science, or a really good semester of computer science at the college level. Now, one of the reasons they did this is, one of the things that many students, males as well as females, find extremely intimidating is you're in your intro class and there is some person, usually male, who has been programming since they were, well, pick a number between 9 and 13, or maybe it's 6 and 13, and who is completely into computers. And most of the teachers who teach computer science in high school are really not very knowledgeable about computer science. And so this individual has been just dying to meet a real computer scientist. And what do they do when they finally have a real computer scientist teaching in class? Yeah? They talk. They go like, I want to tell you about how I hacked this, and I did this, and I did that, and so on. And all the other students in the class are going like, oh, I'll never pass this class. I mean, these people know so much. So one, they diminished that by grouping according to prior experience. But 2, they really, they realized after a couple of years that that wasn't quite enough. Because they were still seeing this kind of behavior surface even in the different sections. And so they realized that if they actually had a nice conversation with the individual and say, Joe, I'm so glad you're in my class. It's so great that you have all this experience. I'm sure you don't realize that when you talk about the stuff in class, it's a bit intimidating to some of the other students. So if you could just be a little bit more quiet about it. And one of the things that happened is that, to a large extent, it's not completely gone. I was sitting in the CS 70 class, which is the third class in the sequence, this spring, and there were these two students who were doing it. But it was, I talked to the chair of the department about it, and he said, so the person who was teaching, was a very good teacher, was somebody who was actually a visitor, who now has actually got hired as a permanent faculty member. But he said, I didn't want to talk to him about it until after the search process is finished, because I figured that it would be really depressing for him. So he said, but I'm going to talk to him as soon as it's over. And so it was a very deliberate thing that said, let's try and make sure that what goes on in the classroom is supported for all students. And one of the things that's interesting to me is that I've been in I've given a talk about this at lots of computer science departments, and afterwards there'll be one or two male faculty that come up to me and they say, Maria, that was me. I was that person in that class. I had no idea. You're absolutely right. I was so happy that finally I could talk to somebody. So Jenny, I want to know, were you that person in your class?
No, I was not.
I was pretty
surprised that I was put in 42.
Okay. Yes?
How did you determine the prior experience? Was it up to the students, or was there some sort of...
It was left to, the students were asked. It wasn't actually a placement exam, but then students could also switch in the first couple of weeks if they figured they had ended up in the wrong valley.
Can I just check something? This whole time, even before when the numbers were low, you still had computer science intro required?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been required since at least 92,
so
maybe.
That gives your school a big advantage. You get them in the class.
Yeah. So I should say something about this before I go on to advice for success. While I was at the University of British Columbia, which is a large, public research university, we went from being about 15% female to 27% female in our CS major over a 5-year period. And there was a situation where we couldn't force people to take it because it wasn't, the only people it was a required course for were the engineering students, and they didn't take the same course as others. And computer science is not an engineering science. And so we had to use a completely different set of approaches. So for example, I'd say the two major things we did there are, first of all, we put a sentence in the undergraduate student's handbook that said, all science students are encouraged, independent of major, are encouraged to take at least one computer science course, since it will be helpful. Now, politically, it would be totally impossible to get the Faculty of Science to make it a requirement for all science students. But it turns out that female students read the handbook, and secondly, they actually take advice. And so, the percentage of female students in our intro class went from like 28 to 38% in 1 year, just with that sentence. It's ridiculous, but it's true. The second thing we did was, we used to have a computer literacy course, we still do, called CS 100, and then at that point, the real intro to computer science for people who were thinking about being CS majors was CS 114. And what would happen is you couldn't take both the CS 100 and the CS 114 for credit. Well, that's ridiculous, because what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to tell the students, and CS 100 was like 60% female. You want to be able to tell the students in this computer literacy course who are doing really well, you should take 114 or whatever the real intro course is, because there's very little overlap. So we just had to get the credits, make it possible for people to get credits for both. We also made the instructors in all of the intro courses, we sort of conditioned them to talk to high-performing female students and say, just take one more course. Because one of the things we learned, and it's the same at MUD, at MUD, we have a lot of females that they've never taken computer science, they take CS5, and they love it. but they're not going to be a CS major. I mean, God, who would want to do that? But because they really liked it, they take the next course, which is CS 60. And then when they really like that, and then when they get a great summer job, then they take CS 70. And once they've taken 3 courses, it's sort of like, well, I got really good jobs, I'm doing really well, there's a lot of women in my classes, why wouldn't I do this? So it's sort of like, it's not that you persuade people to become CS majors, is you get them to take the next course multiple times. So the other thing we did at UBC that helped enormously was in many science faculties, there's a ton of students who are taking biology or chemistry as majors, thinking they're going to go to med school. And so, for example, typically out of, say, 1,500 first-year students at UBC in science, 900 thought they were going to med school. Really, about 90 will go to med school per year. So there's a huge miss. And so you end up with a lot of very unhappy biology and chemistry graduates. So one of the things we started doing, and the faculty in biology and chemistry, they know this, and it's very frustrating for them. So we started advertising in the second year biology and chemistry classes that, you know, a great double major is computer science and biology or computer science and chemistry, and it will be great whether you go to graduate school in biology or chemistry or go to medical school or, heaven forbid, end up working in some other area. And so at this point, something like 40% at UBC of the joint CS biology majors are female. So there are, even without the advantage at MUD, where every single student that's going to look very funny on the video. It's me. I have too much electricity. It's just I keep misbehaving. Okay, now I'm going to tell you my advice for success, and I will tell you the advice that I'm going to tell you I did not know when I was your age. So.
Are you still being transmitted there?
I think so. What do you think? Thank you. So I'm one of those really obnoxious people growing up who was the smartest person always in the room and was really proud of it. Okay, raise your hand if you have suffered from this. Thank you. Thank you for being honest. And I really thought that, and yeah, I liked being really smart. And I liked math because I was really good at it. It made me feel even smarter. Oh God, I was horrible. And you know, I really thought that the people who would make the biggest contributions in society and be the most successful were the people who were the smartest. Now, where's the student who's working with Paul Seymour? Yeah, he is one of the smartest people I know in the world. And he's made a really big difference. So it is true that there are people who are really, really incredibly deep and insightful who are going to make a huge difference. But the fact of the matter is that most people, and this actually describes Paul as well, most people who make a big difference in the world do it because they follow the things that I've got here. So, first of all, if you want to make a difference, you've got to pick something important to work on. I mean, if you work on something that's not going to make a big difference, I can pretty much guarantee to you that unless you're incredibly lucky and you fall over a cliff and you find something, it's probably not going to work. The second one is hard work and persistence are way, way more important than how smart you are or creative you are or anything else. So Paul worked for, well, I don't know how many years on the Graf-Minor conjecture. And he had a partner, and they worked together on it, and eventually they got it. But boy, and it was a really long slog, and it's just really hard work, and it's beautiful work, and he's solved many, many other important problems. But you know, one of the things about just about everyone I know that makes progress, it didn't just happen like this. It happened, they will have had many, many weeks, months, years even sometimes when they feel like they're not making progress. So persistence and hard work beats just about everything else. And persistence, especially when you doubt that you're going to succeed. I don't know, well, I'll just tell you, I mean, I really wanted to meet somebody that I could marry and have kids with. And I finally gave up, totally. That was, well, I broke up with my then boyfriend, who's another mathematician, and swore off man forever. That was in the morning. Guess who I met that afternoon? That's a long story, I won't go there, but Nick and I just celebrated 3 days ago our 32nd wedding anniversary. Okay, build teams and alliances. You know, often, especially if you're doing something about change, so I like to work on changing society. That's sort of what I decided I would do with my life. I've already told you what I want to change with my life, and that's to make the culture of science and engineering welcoming, supportive for everyone, whether they look like the dominant group, which is white males, now it's Asian males as well, or not. And one of the things I've learned is that working with others really helps. But it's true for research as well. I mean, one of the things I love about theoretical computer science is many of the papers have several authors on it, and people value collaboration. You know, mathematics is becoming much more collaborative.
Did she take off the mic?
Well, they simply won't get there won't be any.
It's advice, you know, we don't want to share the advice, right?
My mic closer to you and turn this up.
Okay.
See how that looks.
So I found it incredibly helpful, and I'll speak up as well, incredibly helpful to whatever I'm working on, look for people who will work with me on it and who will complement things.
So this is just going to be on the table.
Okay. Perfect. The fourth one, which is, I'll just say, is very hard for me, but it's really worth doing. You know, I tend to sort of like start running in some direction, and I just run as fast as I can, and it's me. See? It's me. And I remember coming back from, while I was here at Princeton, coming back from having just had a really horrible day where I had an argument with the president, an argument with the dean of the faculty, et cetera, and you know, I came home and our son Yannick was over for dinner, and I just went, why do I have to run full force, head first into brick walls all the time? And he looked at me and said, Mom, you know, somebody has to make all the mistakes that others learn from. So, you know, there are certain advantages for being very pig-headed, which I certainly am. But it's really a good idea. I mean, I talked about the importance of persistence. But I think it's really a good idea, and I do this regularly, is to just take a step back every once in a while and evaluate what you're doing. So for example, when you're working on your PhD thesis, I mean, when you're working on the problems that are going to make up, and you being sort of like, it's like you're just stuck down this rabbit hole, it really helps to step back and try some new approaches. So then the final one is, and this is one that took me the longest to learn, was ask for help. And you know, I think often especially if we've been very successful as students, and we're very proud of the fact that we have been successful, it's very hard to reach out and ask for help. And one of the things I'm very proud of at MUD is it's sort of pretty impossible to survive at MUD as a student without asking for help. And the reason we make it that way is because we want people to learn this strategy. And so essentially we make the assignments way too hard to do by yourself. And we force you into working in groups and asking people for help. And no matter how bright you are, I would say there's probably a couple of students a year in a class of about 200 who maybe could do it without asking for help, but the culture is so strong that they tend to work with others. So I'll talk to you a little bit about asking for help. So I mentioned Sheryl Sandberg. I don't usually talk about Sheryl as much as I'm talking in this talk, but I'm going to talk about Sheryl a lot for the next several months because I think she does amazing things, and I really want to stand up for her. I went to see Sheryl almost exactly a year ago, and one of the things I really struggle with at MUD is getting MUD to be better known. Now, why does it matter? Well, MUD is the most innovative place for education in science and engineering and math that I've ever seen in my life. The faculty think day in and day out about how to teach in ways that are going to help people learn. And so, for example, this example about computer science is a great example. They really figured out a way to teach introductory computer science in a way that makes it accessible to a wide range of people who probably would not find conventional approaches particularly attractive or engaging. But the problem is, in this country and around the world, you don't copy institutions you've never heard of. You copy places like Princeton or MIT or Caltech, because those are the places everyone's heard of. So somebody sent me a link to Sheryl's TED Talk, which is you should watch one of her talks. There are lots of them on YouTube. She's really inspiring. And she talked a lot about the need for more women in technology, and particularly the need for more women studying computer science. So I got in touch with her and I said, I want to come and tell you about what we've done at MUD. We're now 40% female in our computer science major. And so I went to visit Facebook. It was my first time. I was nervous. I mean, she's sort of a celebrity. So we sit down, we're in this conference room, and I start talking to her about this, and she keeps on pulling people in, you got to hear more about this, you can't believe what they're doing at MUD. And I said, Sheryl, I need help with something. I really need help getting MUD better known. And after that, every single time she gave a talk about women in technology, she talks about Harvey College and what we've done with women in computer science. So if any of you saw the New York Times article or the Bloomberg Businessweek article or the PBS NewsHour interview or the 3 things that happened on NPR or the 2 things on CNN Money or the Al Jazeera English or the Fox News things about Harvey College and what we've done with women in computer science or a whole bunch of others, it was all because of Sheryl. Because she took it seriously. And she felt, well, if MUD can do it, so can other places. So, pick something important to work on, persist, work hard and persist, build teams and alliances, be willing to rethink your strategy when necessary, and ask for help. You will succeed no matter what. I mean, every single one of you will succeed. So now very quickly, let me give you some Sheryl's. These were from her Hopper talk. Okay, there's some overlap. Believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, no one else will. Anyone here suffer from the imposter syndrome? You sometimes wonder whether you're really as good as everybody thinks you are. Big time. In spite of being the smartest person in the room, right? I doubt myself all the time. So, believe in yourself. So if you do suffer from the imposter syndrome, believing in yourself just means don't let the fact that you wonder if you actually have any talent stop yourself from doing things. It's fine to wonder about it. Just keep on going. Number 2, aim high. Well, number 3, if you want to have children, pick the right partner. I cannot emphasize this enough.
I would recommend picking right now, even if you don't want to.
Yes, actually, good point. Yeah, that's really true. Okay, she talks about leaning forward into her career, into your career. So one of the things that often happens to people who suffer from the imposter syndrome is you might hold yourself back a little from going like, oh, I really couldn't do that job. Really couldn't be a professor at MIT. That's impossible. Nicole couldn't possibly be at MSR Research. I mean, well, they are both, but it's really common to sometimes hold yourself a little bit back. And what Cheryl says is, don't do that. Lean forward, because if you don't reach for the next step, you're going to miss the opportunity of having that next step. And so always being willing to sort of like reach a little bit further than where you think you can get to is a really good thing. And then I mentioned the fact that in her generation, most women they just don't talk about being female. I mean, I had this group of about 20 women who are at the vice president or higher level in major tech companies and who are in their early 40s. And to a person, they said, throughout my career, I never mentioned being female because that would be a career limiting move. I always just acted like I was just like one of the guys. And so one of the things that Cheryl says is we should all be willing to speak up for the fact that, as Tal will say, there are things that women, like breastfeeding, like actually giving birth, like having a huge belly for 9 months, well, actually it's not the whole 9 months. There are things that are different for us. And it's important that we stand up for the fact that women have a right to have really wonderful careers. Okay. So I'm going to close, and then we'll have time for questions with this bit about having it all. I cannot tell you how many times in my life I have given up something for something else. And I never wanted to give up whatever that something was. So for me, I've been painting my entire life. I thought very seriously about pursuing art rather than pursuing mathematics. Eventually, I decided it was way easier to do art on the side than math on the side. It was a good choice. I got my PhD in mathematics at a time when there were very few jobs in mathematics. There were 2 jobs in Canada in pure mathematics the year that I got my PhD. In all of Canada and the US, there were 83. There were approximately 500 people applying for those 83 jobs. And I eventually, a year later, I did get one of those jobs, but it was a place that I just thought was unlivable. It was about 25 miles north of Detroit. And I was there for a year and then went back to do a PhD in computer science. And I cannot tell you how sad I was about giving up math. Now, it turned out I didn't really give up math, but at the time I didn't really know. Because everyone in the math community, or almost everyone in the math community, was saying, what a loss, what a terrible thing. There is, computer science is not intellectually deep. There's blah, blah, blah. What is it about me?
No, I think it must be a cell phone.
It's really weird. you cannot be really, really, I mean, you have to interact with people at university. You don't have to interact with people if you're in an industry research lab. And it was very hard for me at the time to accept, in many ways, to accept that. I loved being at universities. I loved working with students. It turned out to be a totally great thing to do. Then we went to the University of British Columbia from there. To a certain extent, that was because I wanted my kids to grow up in Canada. My father was getting old and lived in British Columbia. Western Canada didn't have a great computer science department, so I really wanted to build one there. It was a great choice. Everyone thought we were nuts, because we were going from one of the best places for theoretical computer science in the universe to a really pretty so-so department. But I would talk about things we had managed to do at UBC that were really making a difference for married couples or partners, whatever. And I had this conversation with department chairs at, say, Snowbird, which is the computer science department chair thing. And people would go, of course you can do that in Canada. It's a kind of a gentler place. They just didn't see any relevance between the things we would do there. So I finally decided I was going to move back to the US. And I decided I would go to a showcase place. You know, the kind of place that people copy. It was a really good choice. It was also probably one of the hardest jobs I've had in my career, not the hardest job. That was being vice president while my kids were becoming teenagers, which was awful. But it was really hard, partially because of the cultural differences. I mean, I'd never been at an Ivy League university. I'd always been at large public universities. The culture in places like this is really different, but I learned a huge amount. And I thought I would go from that to being, president of a research university. That was definitely where I thought I was going. And when I was approached by Harvey, my college, the only reason I actually looked at the stuff that they sent was I knew it had an incredible reputation for math education. And one of my special loves, oh my God, what am I doing? One of my special loves in life is math education. You can see that. We will not tell Princeton I am destroying friend classroom 006.
You're on camera.
So, we ended up going to MUD partly because I love education. And when I think about what's wrong in science and engineering in the world today, there's actually a lot more wrong with education than there is wrong with research. And I decided MUD would be the best place you could work on, really trying to make undergraduate education accessible to everyone. And I have to say, it's been an absolute joy being there. But again, everyone at the time that they heard we were doing this, why would you do that? What? Are you nuts? I mean, even Princeton, when I told them that I was considering it, they didn't even bother to make a counteroffer. Because they were so sure I wouldn't go. It was like, what? You couldn't possibly do that. Well, it was a great choice. So, the point is, everybody is you're going to make choices over and over again in your life. And many times you're making choices between things where either choice is going to be a good choice. Okay. It's just weird. That's all I can say. It's just totally weird. So, that's not supposed to be there. So at this point, I would be delighted to answer questions. I'll just say there is no such thing as a question that would be inappropriate for you to ask. There might be questions that would be inappropriate for me to answer, or for me to say,
With asking inappropriate things.
Yes.
So when you say that the cultures are different at public institutions and Ivy League institutions, what does that mean?
Most public institutions, and most even private institutions, when you hire an assistant professor, you expect them to get tenure. Princeton is proud of the fact that only 1/3 of the people they hire as assistant professors get tenure. Okay? So that's one thing. A second thing is, trying to think about what would be not too critical to say. So I come to Princeton, and like many times a day, my initial reaction to something was, "You cannot be serious. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of." And so, for example, I arrive. So there's tremendous secrecy about salaries at many private institutions. At public institutions, they're published once a year, right? I mean, literally, they're published. It's part of, many states require that the salaries of faculty and administrators at public institutions are published. So when I arrive, I get exactly one envelope from the former dean. And it's inside 2 different envelopes, and I open it up and open it up. And inside there are 6 lines of numbers. Okay? They are the budgets for the 6 departments in the engineering school. And, it's completely secret. So my first year at Princeton, we're having a conversation with the president's cabinet, so it's the top 20 leaders in the place, about how to handle the fact that we're going to have lower than average salary increases. And because, there was a dip in the endowment or whatever. And we can't tell people that because we never tell them about what the average salary increase is, but we don't want people to be discouraged because they got less than average salary increases. And I sort of go, why can't we tell them? Oh, because you just can't. It's completely secret. Okay, a year later, there's some new folks on the thing, and we're having the same conversation. And I go, I know there's a reason why we can't tell people. I can't remember what it is, but maybe we could think about whether it really, maybe we could just tell the top 200 managers. And there's a couple of new people on the cabinet in senior positions, and they go, that's interesting. I wonder why we can't tell people. The 3rd year in a row, when we're having the same conversation, they decide they could tell the top 200 managers because it would help them in informing the people why they're getting lower salary increases than they expected. I mean, it's like the most resistant thing I've seen in my life. So the difference is when you're at a public university, you have to change because you've been dealing with budget cuts and various other kinds of things, and so you're used to making changes on a regular basis. If you're at a very successful institution, there's tremendous fear of change because to some level, you don't know why you're successful. And so, I can remember being told things like, we've been doing it that way for 100 years, and if it's worked for 100 years, it makes sense. That's really the justification you want to use. So just the resistance to change is pretty phenomenal. There are other things that are totally wonderful about Princeton. I mean, Princeton, for one thing, loves teaching its undergraduates to a large extent. That's a really lovely, a great thing that's not true of many institutions. Princeton, once you're a member of the Princeton family, and I mean, I'm a member of the Princeton family forever, Valerie's a member of the Princeton family, everybody who has been an undergraduate or graduate or faculty member is a member of the Princeton family. Those doors open for you forever. I mean, it's extraordinary. So, but it's very different. So would I recommend coming being a junior faculty member here at Princeton? Depends on the department. Some departments are very supportive of their female faculty and others are less.
So as a follow-up question,
Yes.
how do you find that information out?
Oh, yes, very good question. So when you're interviewing for jobs, okay, first piece about the job interview, okay, your goal is whether you want an offer from this place or not, you want them to want to offer you one, okay, because you lose nothing by turning down offers, believe me, it just makes you more valuable. So when you're going through the interview, one, you are incredibly interested in what other faculty members do with their research. Okay? They want to talk to you about their research as much as they want to hear about yours. Okay? Two, you're really interested in undergraduate teaching and graduate students and the future of the institution. You're just really interested. But while you're having those conversations, when you meet with other young women, you can just ask them about, you can ask, have people had children, those kinds of things. But you could also wait until after they have started to make an offer to you to have those conversations. Because it's a good idea, you want them to want you first. Because there will be some people in some departments who will sort of go, oh, you're interested in having children? I mean, it's not legal to do that. It's completely illegal to do that, but it will sometimes happen. So before you accept the offer, you want to make sure that you've had some conversations. And if there aren't young women in this department, you can ask for young women in other departments. And usually deans are, I would say, more savvy about this kind of stuff than department chair. I mean, some department chairs are, some departments chairs aren't. There'll often be people like, for the university, there's somebody like Joan Gurgis, whose job is to think about policies and things like that, so you can ask about that and ask to talk to them.
Yes.
I'd like to bring up your point about finding an important problem, because I feel like, especially in the mathematics and theoretical computer science, that's sort of hard to justify, because especially housing computer science, you tend to equate importance with relevance with applications, and that's not always so straightforward in a theoretical setting. So there are problems that I enjoy, but I'm not sure I'd call them important.
Okay. So what's an important problem can vary at different times in your life. And it's also good to have a range of important problems. Like, I have an impossible problem that I'm working on right now, which is to significantly improve K-12 math education. And I'm actually doing a number of things related to that. But I know that it's a very long shot. So, if I could do that in my lifetime, that would be a really important thing to have done, because it's really needed. When you're thinking about your PhD thesis, a lot of it has to do with, I hate to say this, but there is fashion in the world of theoretical computer science, just like there is fashion in physics and fashion in other areas of computer science. So one of the things that, at least for your PhD, and then probably if you do a postdoc or your early work, you want to try to work on something that people are interested in. And how can you tell whether people are interested in? You can look at, all the various conferences that are relevant. That's usually a pretty good way I don't know, to track what's going on. I think Princeton is allergic to Maria. It's the only thing I can think of. I think you want to, obviously your advisor will have ideas about what's relevant and what's interesting and so on. In theoretical computer science, I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference in the world if somebody proves that P equals NP or P is not equal to NP. But it will definitely get a lot of attention, and it will almost certainly have an interesting proof that is well valued. So, I don't think in theoretical computer science the only important things are applications by any means. They're really interesting structural problems. Yes.
So 20 years ago, when I was either just finishing or a postdoc, you were on a panel for young women graduate students. And you said some really inspirational things. And one of the things that I never forget that you said, so I was wondering maybe you would want to repeat this. But this thing about
you didn't say it yourself.
No, it was the issue of failure.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
So go ahead.
Okay, well, I have another set of rules for success, and the first one is fail openly and often. That one?
I think. Because you said that if you don't fail, you're not trying.
You're not aiming high enough.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've already heard that I fail a lot. I really do. And there are a whole bunch of reasons why it's important to fail. So first of all, you learn more by failing. If you are good at learning, you learn more by failing than you learn by succeeding. Because you have learned that when you succeed at something, you often don't know. It's what I was talking about Princeton. You often don't know why you succeeded. But when you fail at something, there's something to learn from that failure, and it will carry forward for you and allow you to be more successful in the future. The second reason is, if you're not failing, you're not aiming high enough. Like, you only discover how far you can go and how much you can push yourself and what you can actually do with your life when you touch that limit, which means you're not going to succeed. And the third reason is particularly important for people who are perceived as being successful, like me. When you fail, and when you're open about the fact that you fail, you allow others around you to fail. You allow other people to reach high and find how far they can go. And so that's my number one rule of success, is fail openly and often. And I will tell you that I said this when I first got to MUD, and at the beginning of my second year, when I had failed gloriously, dismally actually, at a number of things with a number of the faculty. A number of faculty said, "We just wish you'd stop failing so much." The second rule of success is take the time to learn to be good at something that you find very hard. So this is related to failing openly and often. So many of a lot of our culture says, do what you're good at and you'll be really successful. Well, the problem is, if you always do what you're good at, you don't learn how to learn nearly as well as you learn when you work on something that's really difficult for you. And many of us who teach, many of the students we teach, we're going to be teaching something mathematical that we found, like for me, I always talk about learning mathematics is like drinking chocolate milkshakes. It's just delicious and smooth, it goes down so easily. Okay, well, I can tell you most of the students I've taught in life, mathematics was not chocolate milkshakes. And so when I learned to focus on things, so I happen to be particularly physically uncoordinated. So one of the things I learned to do when I went to MUD was learn to ride a skateboard. It was terrifying. The first time I got on the skateboard, first of all, I'm wearing pads on every part of my body, including a helmet. I'm shaking so hard the skateboard is vibrating. But I can ride a skateboard, right? I mean, I'm not great, but I'm acceptable. But it took a long time. It took me like 4 years to get close to what the students learn in like their first half week of MUD. So learning to do something that's really hard for you to learn and doing it, persisting enough to get good at it, it helps to develop your confidence. It helps you become a much better teacher. And I told you about being physically uncoordinated. So a year ago, January, a friend of mine signed me up for 3 days of ski lessons. And I'm like, no, I'm a really horrible skier, and taking lessons is like the worst thing I can imagine doing, private ski lessons. And I explained to the guy, like how, he said, you really don't want to take these lessons, do you? And I said, absolutely not, but Lenny is not worth arguing with. He's even more stubborn than I am. And, like I say, if you tell me one thing, I can do that. If you tell me 2 things to focus on at once, physical things, I can't. well, you know, we did one by one, 4 different things. It was exhausting. The next day, we're at the top of the hill. And he says, Maria, just as you're coming out of a turn and about to start the next one, throw yourself downhill a little bit. Okay. So I did. And I went, in that one instant, I went from being a crappy skier to being a pretty good skier. It was the thing I was missing. It was amazing. So I have now taken 10 days of lessons with this guy spread over a year and a half. And I actually competed in a competitive ski race in February. And I was not the worst skier. I was the 7th worst. So it was a great example of taking the time to learn to be good at something that was naturally very difficult for me. Okay, the third rule for success is called the no jerk rule. Do you remember all of these rules?
No, I just remember the one about the
failure. That one was relevant for me. Okay, so the no jerk rule is, think of it this way. It's the letters J-E-R-K in black in a red circle with a line through it. So, don't let people around you be jerks. So, one of the things I really love about computer science is that most of the very senior people in our field, Dick Harvey is a great example, are really nice human beings.
How about you just turn it off? It's getting to the point that it's really impossible.
They're not even on.
If we just turn on the speakers.
There we go.
It's a ghost, right?
No,
The ghost is the
that last
trendsetter.
one was the one that was, yeah.
You guys can hear me at the back.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, so I created this rule when the one and only time I met Steve Jobs. How many of you have read Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs? It's actually quite interesting. And you know, Steve Jobs in many did amazing things at Apple, but he was a complete, total jerk. And the first time I met him, and the only time I met him, he was so obnoxious. He told me that he was going to destroy my career because I was trying to recruit a couple of people from Pixar to UBC. And this is John Lasseter. It's in the lights.
No, I think it's the cell phones. Everybody, please just turn your phones off. I think it really is the issue.
No, I think it's actually one of the lights is going down. Because I've heard this happen before.
You could put it on airplane mode.
I think it might be this.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, the screen to like turn off.
actually, it might really be this.
Yeah,
This mic.
the speakers not. You can print it.
What's that?
You can just turn it off.
Well, we would have to figure out how to be able to turn off the mic. Good. Well done. Okay, this is really good. So, one of the things that I think is really important in a discipline, and it's one of the things I'm really quite proud about theoretical computer science, because I feel that theoretical computer science is one of the most supportive and ethical disciplines I've been involved with in my life, is that there really are not a lot of jerks. So there are other areas in science where it's like the way you prove you're really successful is you're disrespectful to PhD students and to junior faculty and to secretaries and anyone who seems at lower status. And so one of the things that I think is a value that's held in theoretical computer science, and I'm really proud of it, It doesn't matter how famous you are or successful. You should treat everyone with respect. And to a very large extent, my experience has been that that's really true. And, you know, it's one of the, I think, reasons that I feel really lucky to be part of the theory community.
So how do you handle it when someone is a jerk? Like, how did you handle Steve Jobs?
Well, Steve Jobs, I basically told him that I would destroy his career. You know, like, this is ridiculous, right? But we're standing, it was at the exhibit at SIGGRAPH, when we're standing, there's a whole circle of people around us, when he says, if you try to recruit John Lasseter and Bill Reeves, I'm going to destroy your career. And I said, Steve, you don't know how powerful I am. I have a lot of powerful friends, and if you take me on, it's going to be But, you know, I mean, the truth is he never forgave me for it. I mean, it was like, over and over again, you know, someone would say, I'm going to nominate you to this University Advisory Council for Apple, and I'd say, I don't think so. I don't think Steve Jobs likes me. And, you know, like, they come back a week later and they say, what did you do to him? So, yeah, it's too bad. Yeah, so, but more generally, what I do, Nicole, is I have the no jerk, since that particular time, so I met him in 1990, so it's been more than 20 years, I have the no jerk sign on my whiteboard. And people will come in and they'll say, what does that mean? And I'll go, we don't have any jerks here. And it was really funny when I first came to Princeton, and I put this on my whiteboard, and, you know, these department chairs or other senior faculty would come in, because what do people really want to do? They want to hire another faculty member that they really like. And so they'd come in and say, we have this guy that we really want to hire. And I'd say, well, you know, it's very important to me what kind of human being this is, because they're going to be a role model for junior faculty and for graduate students, for undergraduate students. So, you know, can you tell me a little bit about how they treat others? Are they a good mentor? Well, you know, you do this a couple of times. Everyone shows up in your office and they say, I have this wonderful human being who we want to recruit, and he's a great mentor, and he's this, and he's that, etc. So, you know, it helps, obviously, when, you know, when you're in a position like a department chair, or, and so on, or a dean, or the president. But, you know, I think a big part of it is modeling. I remember probably in the early 90s, having Dick Karp had come to give a lecture at UBC, and I was driving him back to the airport, and I was taking him for dinner on the way, and I said, you know, Dick, I just want to tell you, I've been thinking a lot about different disciplines, and I think the fact that you are so ethical and honest and caring to people around you has had a big impact on our discipline. He blushed. He's like, oh, really? That's about the nicest thing that anyone ever said to me. But, you know, I reminded, I was at the Turing Awards banquet, I think it was last weekend in San Francisco, and was sitting at a table with Dick and Bob Tarjan and a couple of other people, and I reminded him of this. And it's really true, the senior people in your discipline can have a huge impact on what the culture is like. But the culture has to be sustained. It can't, you know, so, I mean, it's one of the reasons I talk about this stuff a lot is that I think that if you know, Dick is, I believe, 75, 77, something like that now. I mean, he will not always be sort of the god of theoretical computer science, and it's important that we all sort of continue to build this set of values. Did you guys have more embarrassing questions to ask?
When you say pick a partner for your work, what person do you evaluate as a good partner?
You mean a partner for to collaborate with?
Sure.
Okay. So first of all, it really helps to work with somebody that you trust and you enjoy working with. And it's really not worth it to collaborate with somebody who doesn't have the same values as you have. So that's one of the first things. And so how can you figure that out? I mean, one, you can talk. It's actually worth talking about things. Like, I remember my own PhD advisor, Tony Lau, whom I adore, and, you know, incredibly ethical person. I had solved a problem in the mathematical, an open problem in the Mathematical Monthly, and he suggested that I write it up. And as I was writing it up, somebody else solved the problem, and so he suggested that we co-author it. And then this person wanted to add some results that I thought were trivial to it. And I talked to my advisor about it, and he said, you're going to have many publications in your life. Just let the guy publish it, and don't be a co-author in it, because you really don't want to have a paper that you're not proud of. And so, and this was somebody who was at some university someplace else I never met face to face. But it was really good advice that, you know, a result, no matter what the result is, you really want to be in a situation where you write papers that you end up being proud of. And so you want to find people who have common values with you. And, you know, so there are some people in our field, not very many of them, who have the reputation for basically stealing results. And, you know, some graduate student someplace had this, and then all of a sudden this other person who has this reputation is publishing a paper that has very similar results, kinds of things. No matter how famous somebody like that is, you do not want to work with them. I mean, I think you really want to be careful and choose people to work with who have your set of values. Also helps, you know, sometimes it helps to work with people who like the same kinds of problems as you like, but sometimes it also helps to work with people who like the same kinds of problems but who have very different approaches. Because I've seen some results happen because 4 different people who had very different sort of mathematical talents and visions of things, seen them solve a problem that no one of them could have come close to. So, you know, that mix of a shared interest but slightly different things that you're good at works well too. But then, you know, sometimes there's a guy called David Kirkpatrick who's at UBC, whom I haven't worked with recently, but I wrote several papers with, and we actually collaborated by phone. And that's how closely we thought about problems. You know, I mean, we couldn't even see what the other person was drawing, but we were so used to sort of thinking about things that you could just conceptualize together. That's a great experience too, but that's, you know, I haven't had many experiences like that in the world.
So how about one last question? Maria's going to be on the panel tomorrow. So Maria, your pick. Everybody wants to ask a question. Raise your hand and Maria will pick one.
Oh well, okay.
Good choice.
Yeah, I saw you painting as you were listening to the talk. So how could you concentrate on it?
So one of the things I realized, I don't really know how I discovered this. So it turns out that at least for me, painting and listening and speaking are completely parallel processes. There's no interaction whatsoever. So when I mentioned I often mentor people on the phone, I mean, it's gotten to the point now that if I'm not actually talking to somebody, it feels weird. Or if I'm not listening to something. So they're just, I mean, they're just absolutely, completely disjoint processes. So the thing that I do notice about painting is I used to have a lot of problems with wanting to ask tons of questions, and that's Jenny. And for me, it was like the way of keeping my mind engaged. And what I realize now is if I paint, I'm much less disruptive. So for those people who know, you know, who knew me before I started to paint constantly in meetings, I started about 15 years ago, to a person they'll say, oh, she's way better this way. It's such an improvement. I think we're done. I just want to say, Tal, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. It's been great being here today. Every single one of you, you're going to be really successful. And it really helps to have an experience like this, in whether you're a starting PhD student or a finishing PhD student. I can tell you that actually being in a room where everyone else is female is actually, it's something that's really important. And I mean, one of the things, so Jennifer Chase, who phoned me at the beginning of my talk, I'll have to call her back now. One of the things that we do for each other is that whenever the other person's feeling down, we know we can call the other person, and the other person will be a cheerleader and a supporter, and it's really good to have that kind of person in your life. So if you don't already have that kind of person in your life, this is a great opportunity to get to know some people, and it's amazing how much it helps. Just all of us have times when we're really down, when we feel like, I'm never going to solve this problem. I've had a fight with my whoever, my thesis advisor, my boss, my board chair. And it's just really good to have people in your life who will be there for you no matter what. So this is a great opportunity to find that kind of person.
So, thank you very much.
Are in a place and there's this buzzing, we know that it's...
Breakfast tomorrow is at 8:30 and we're going to start at 9 a.m. with